Before the chaos, before the fractured minds and the sleepless armies, there was only the wind. Picture, if you will, a time long before the maps of the modern world were drawn, when the earth was vast and silent, ruled not by the machinery of men, but by the slow, rhythmic breathing of the seasons. We begin our journey not in a trench or a crime-ridden alley, but in the high, misty altitudes of the ancient East, where the air is thin and the light possesses a clarity that pierces the soul. Here, on the windswept steppes of Mongolia and the rugged hillsides of northern China, a plant had grown for millennia, a humble, leafless shrub that clung to the rocky soil with the tenacity of a guardian. This was the Ma Huang, a green sentinel that had witnessed the rise and fall of dynasties, the passing of nomadic caravans, and the slow drift of the stars overhead. It was not a majestic tree, nor a vibrant flower, but a creature of utility, a collection of jointed stems that rustled softly in the mountain breeze. Yet, within its fibrous veins, locked away in the cellular cathedral of its being, lay a secret. It held a molecule, a specific arrangement of atoms that nature had devised to deter herbivores, a bitter defense that happened, by a cosmic accident of biology, to resonate with the nervous system of the human animal. For thousands of years, this secret remained between the plant and the earth, but the human condition is defined by its frailty, by the vulnerability of the flesh. In the ancient world, to lose one's breath was to lose one's connection to the divine. Breath was chi, the vital force, the spirit that animated the clay. To gasp for air, to feel the chest tighten under the grip of asthma or the weight of a cold, was to feel the spirit slipping away, blocked by the heavy humors of the body. And so, the ancients sought help from the green world. Legend whispers of Shen Nong, the divine farmer, the mythical emperor of Chinese prehistory, who walked the wild lands tasting the herbs, classifying the bitter and the sweet, the poisonous and the healing. It is said he possessed a transparent belly, allowing him to see the effects of the plants as they worked upon his internal organs. Whether myth or memory, the knowledge was real. The healers of the Han dynasty knew that when the chest was tight and the breath came in shallow, panicked rasps, a tea brewed from the stems of the Ma Huang could perform a miracle. It was a harsh, bitter draught, but as it washed down the throat, something profound occurred. The airways, constricted and swollen, would suddenly relax. The invisible hands crushing the lungs would let go. The patient would inhale deeply, drawing the cool air of the world back into their blood, and with that breath came a surge of alertness, a brightening of the eyes, a temporary banishment of fatigue. It was the gift of the plant, the restoration of the sacred breath. But let us drift forward on the river of time, leaving the ancient mists for the sharp, gaslit clarity of the late 19th century. The world was changing. The age of the herbalist, with his bundles of dried roots and intuitive wisdom, was giving way to the age of the chemist, the man of glass and scale, who sought not to bargain with nature, but to master it. This was the era of the Great Separation, when science began to pull apart the tapestry of existence to find the single threads that held it together. It was no longer enough to know that the willow bark eased pain, or that the poppy brought sleep, or that the Ma Huang opened the lungs. The new priesthood of science wanted to know why. They wanted to identify the specific ghost within the machine, the single active principle that performed the magic, so they could discard the rest of the plant as mere chaff. It is here, in this moment of transition between the old magic and the new science, that we find our first protagonist. Picture a man of quiet dignity, a bridge between the East and the West. His name was Nagai Nagayoshi. Born into the twilight of the samurai era in Japan, he carried within him the discipline of his ancestors, transmuted into the rigorous patience of the laboratory. He had traveled far from the cedar forests of his homeland to the brick and mortar of Berlin, the beating heart of Western chemistry. There, under the gray skies of Prussia, he absorbed the reductionist philosophy of the time, that the universe was composed of chemicals and that these chemicals could be isolated, named, and controlled. When Nagai returned to Japan, he brought with him the tools of this new trade: the beakers, the burners, the knowledge of solvents and precipitates. But his heart remained tethered to the natural pharmacopoeia of his culture. He turned his attention to the ma huang. He did not look at the plant as a mystic would, seeing a spirit. He looked at it as an architect would, seeing a structure waiting to be dismantled. Imagine the atmosphere of his laboratory in the year 1885. It is a space of profound stillness, smelling of ethanol, sulfur, and dust. The light filters in through high windows, illuminating the particles dancing in the air, a visual reminder of the invisible world he sought to conquer. Nagai stands over a workbench, his hands steady, his eyes focused. He is performing a sophisticated alchemy, boiling the stems of the ma huang, treating the dark, murky extract with acids and bases, filtering it again and again. He is stripping away the chlorophyll, the cellulose, the sugars, the water, stripping away the body of the plant to find its soul. It is a process of negation, of removing everything that is not the essence. Hours turn into days, days into weeks. The liquid in his flask becomes clearer, purer. And then, finally, the moment of revelation. As the solvent evaporates, something miraculous begins to happen at the bottom of the glass. Out of the nothingness, crystals begin to form. They are long, needle-like shards, white as winter frost, glittering in the gaslight. Nagai had done it. He had caught the ghost. He named it ephedrine. It was the isolated spirit of the ma huang, stripped of its vegetal clothing. This white powder was the key that fit the lock of the human lungs. It was potent, measurable, and pure. When dissolved and administered, it opened the airways with a force and reliability that the tea had never possessed. It was a triumph of the intellect, a gift to the asthmatic and the suffocating. In that quiet room, Nagai must have felt a profound sense of peace. He had taken the chaos of nature and refined it into order. He had distilled the sacred breath into a powder that could be stored in a jar. There was no malice in this creation, no shadow of the horrors to come. It was simply medicine, born of a desire to heal, shining with the innocent optimism of the 19th century. However, the river of history does not stop at the moment of discovery. It flows on, carrying our inventions into waters we never intended them to navigate. Ephedrine was a miracle, yes, but it was a miracle bound by the limitations of the earth. To make it, one still needed the ma huang plant. One needed the sun, the rain, the soil, and the harvest. One needed to gather the stems, dry them, ship them, and process them. Nature is slow, and the appetites of the industrial world are ravenous. As the 20th century dawned, the demand for this breath-giving compound began to outstrip the supply. The hillsides could not grow the green sentinel fast enough to feed the coughing cities of the modern age, and so the desire shifted. The chemists began to ask a new question: must we rely on the plant at all? If we know the shape of the molecule, the architecture of its atoms, can we not build it ourselves? Can we not construct the ghost from scratch, using the elemental bricks of the universe? This is the seductive whisper of synthesist, the belief that man can bypass the slow gestation of biology. It brings us to the year 1919. The world had just emerged from the Great War, a cataclysm that had shattered the old empires and stained the fields of Europe with blood. It was a time of exhaustion, a time when humanity felt old and battered. Yet, in the laboratories, the work continued with a relentless momentum. Enter Akira Ogata, another Japanese chemist, a man of a different generation than Nagai. If Nagai was the patient gardener who pruned the tree to find the fruit, Ogata was the engineer who sought to redesign the seed. He was working in a world that demanded efficiency, speed, and potency. He looked at the molecule of ephedrine that Nagai had isolated. He studied its structure, a skeleton of carbon, hydrogen, and nitrogen, with a single oxygen atom attached like a heavy anchor. Ogata realized that the structure was close to something else, something simpler, something more elemental. He theorized that if he could just tweak the molecule, if he could strip away that single oxygen atom, the resulting compound would be more soluble, more volatile, and, perhaps, more powerful. It would be able to cross the blood-brain barrier, the fortress wall that protects the mind, with terrifying ease. But how to perform this surgery on the invisible? How to reach into the microscopic world and pluck a single atom from a molecular chain? Ogata turned to the elements of fire and earth. He chose red phosphorus and iodine substances that, in the hands of a layperson, seem innocuous, but in the hands of a chemist are the agents of radical transformation. The process he developed was elegant in its brutality. It was a reduction reaction, a chemical stripping down. Picture the scene again, 34 years after Nagai's discovery. The setting is similar, the glassware, the silence, the intent, but the energy has shifted. The air feels sharper, more electric. Ogata mixes the ephedrine with the red phosphorus and iodine. He applies heat. Inside the flask, a violent dance of atoms occurs. The iodine acts as a catalyst, a molecular broker that facilitates the exchange. The phosphorus hungers for oxygen, pulling it away from the ephedrine molecule. It is a liberation, or perhaps a mutilation. The heavy oxygen atom is torn away, leaving the molecule streamlined, sleek, and hydrophobic. The liquid bubbles and changes. The transformation is complete. What remains is no longer ephedrine. It is a new entity, a cousin to the natural compound, but evolved, harder, faster. He cooled the mixture, he filtered it, and once again crystals formed. But these were not the frosty needles of ephedrine. These were something else. They were crystalline methamphetamine. At that moment, in the year 1919, the substance sat in the bottom of a glass vial, innocent and shimmering. It looked like crushed diamonds. It looked like salt from a dried ocean. It was beautiful in the way that all pure things are beautiful. It caught the light of the laboratory and refracted it, a tiny, glittering universe of potential energy. It is difficult, from our vantage point in the future, to look at that vial without trembling. We know what is locked inside that crystal lattice. We know the phantom legions that are waiting to march out of it. We know the millions of tons of bombs that will be dropped by pilots fueled by its false courage. We know the hollowed-out faces of the addicts in the decades to come, the families shattered, the minds broken by the relentless, grinding wakefulness it induces. We know that this diamond is actually a seed of shadow, a plague that will sweep across continents. But in 1919, in the hands of Akira Ogata, it was none of these things. It was simply a success. It was a chemical victory. He had taken the natural gift of the Ma Huang and refined it into its ultimate, distilled essence. He had created a stimulant that did not just open the lungs, but opened the eyes, opened the mind, and flooded the body with a sensation of limitless capability. It was a captured star, waiting to be swallowed. There is a profound, tragic irony in this silence. The substance was born from a desire to help the world breathe, to help the weary rise. It was born from the ancient tradition of healing, passed down from the mythical Shen Nong to the disciplined Nagai, and finally to the ingenious Ogata. It was a child of medicine. Imagine the crystal sitting there on the wooden bench, cooling in the ambient air of the laboratory. It does not hiss. It does not glow red. It is stable, quiet, and inert. It waits. It waits for the world to catch up to it. It waits for the generals and the warlords to realize what it can do. It waits for the exhaustion of the modern worker to become so great that they will trade their sleep for a few hours of chemical daylight. This is the biography of a molecule. It begins not with malice, but with curiosity. It begins with the scent of herbs on a mountainside and ends with a white powder in a glass jar. The distance between those 2 points is measured in atoms, but the journey represents the fundamental tragedy of human progress. We seek to extract the gold from the earth, to isolate the power from the plant, to refine the experience of being alive until it is pure, potent, and overwhelming. We strive to become the masters of our own biology, to conquer the need for rest, to defeat the darkness of sleep. And in that striving, in that beautiful, terrible ambition, we sometimes forge the very chains that will bind us. The ma huang plant, swaying on the distant hills of Asia, kept its balance with the sun and the soil. It gave its gift gently, buffered by the other fibers of its being. But the crystal in the vial has no buffer. It is pure will. It is pure velocity. And as the lights of the laboratory are extinguished for the night, leaving the room in darkness, the crystal gleams in the shadows, a tiny, sleeping dragon that has just taken its first breath. The alchemists of old sought the philosopher's stone, the substance that would grant eternal life and turn lead into gold. The chemists of the New Age found something else. They found a stone that would grant eternal wakefulness, a gold that would turn the golden hours of sleep into the leaden weight of endurance. The sacred breath had been found, captured, and transformed. Now, it was ready to be unleashed. The silence of the laboratory would not last long. Outside, the 20th century was revving its engines, hungry for fuel. The storm was gathering, and the lightning had been bottled, waiting for the hand that would uncork the thunder. But for now, let us hold this image. The quiet room, the dust motes settling, the smell of iodine fading, and the small pile of white crystals resting in the glass, shining with a terrible, perfect potential. This was the dawn of the age of amphetamines. The sun was rising, but it was a sun that would refuse to set, casting a long, scorching shadow over the history of the world. And so, we leave the laboratory and the alchemist, stepping out of the room where the genie was decanted. We move from the birth of the substance to the world that was waiting to consume it. For a discovery is like a child. Once it is born, it belongs to the world, and the world is a place of hunger, of conflict, and of desperate need. The crystal was no longer just a molecule. It was a tool. And as the decades turned, the hands that reached for it would not be the gentle hands of healers, but the gloved hands of soldiers, the calloused hands of workers, and the trembling hands of the lost. The sacred breath was about to become the wind of war. Picture the turning of the earth, the slow rotation of the continents. The ma huang plant still grows on the hillsides, indifferent to what has been done in its name. The wind still blows through its stems, a soft, whistling song. It remembers the time before the extraction, before the isolation, before the synthesis. It remembers when it was just a plant, and we were just men, and the night was a time for sleeping. But that time has passed. The seal has been broken. The age of the sleepless iron has begun. As we drift away from this moment of creation, let the image of the crystal dissolve into the white clouds of history. We are moving towards the noise now, towards the roar of engines and the march of boots. But never forget the silence where it started. Never forget that the monster began as a medicine, and the plague began as a prayer for breath. In the complex chemistry of the human story, salvation and destruction are often composed of the same elements, separated only by a single atom, a single decision, a single moment of tragic genius. The laboratory fades, the years accelerate, the shadow lengthens, and the diamond of pure energy waits to be swallowed by a century that will never sleep again. The wheel of history turns, grinding slowly against the bedrock of time. We leave behind the sharp, crystalline winds of the Asian steppes and the high-altitude clarity of the Ma Huang. We drift now, carried by the currents of trade and the slow caravans of the Silk Road, moving westward. We pass through the gates of empires that have long since crumbled, tracking a different substance, not a stimulant that sharpens the mind, but a resin that drowns it in honey and darkness. For centuries, the poppy flower had nodded its red head in the fields of Mesopotamia, India, and Turkey. It was the joy plant of the Sumerians, the medicine of the pharaohs, a gift from the earth that promised the cessation of pain. But it was a wild, unruly gift. In its raw form, as the dark, sticky gum of opium, It was a chaotic mixture of secrets. Sometimes it healed, sometimes it killed. It was a game of chance played with the gods of the underworld. To tame this chaotic spirit, we must travel forward through the fog of centuries, arriving in the heart of Europe in the year 1804. The world is on the cusp of the industrial age, yet the nights are still dark, lit only by the flicker of tallow candles and oil lamps. We find ourselves in the town of Paderborn, in the region of Westphalia, Germany. The streets are cobbled and narrow, echoing with the footsteps of the night watchman. The air smells of coal smoke and damp wool. Here, nestled among the timber-framed houses, stands a building with a sign that creaks in the wind. The Einhorn Apothecary, the pharmacy of the unicorn. It is deep night. The town is asleep, wrapped in the heavy blanket of the hours before dawn. But inside the apothecary, a single light burns. Picture, if you will, the interior of this sanctuary of healing. The walls are lined with shelves of dark wood, filled with ceramic jars labeled in Latin script. Dried herbs hang from the rafters, valerian, chamomile, belladonna, casting long, spider-like shadows against the ceiling. The air is thick with the scent of spices, ground roots, and the sharp tang of alcohol. In the back room, amidst the clutter of mortars, pestles, and glass retorts, a young man is working alone. His name is Friedrich Serturner. He is barely 20 years old, an apprentice with ink-stained fingers and eyes that burn with a quiet, obsessive intensity. He is not a distinguished professor from a great university. He is a chemist of the night, a man who works while the world dreams. He is driven by a frustration that gnaws at his mind. He has watched the master pharmacist dispense opium to the suffering, to the soldier with the shattered leg, to the woman with the consumption, to the old man with the gout. He has seen the inconsistency of the plant. One batch of raw opium might soothe a fever, another, same in weight and appearance, might stop the heart forever. Friedrich knows that nature is not chaotic. It is merely encrypted. He believes that hidden within the crude, sticky mess of the poppy juice, there is a single agent, a principium, a sovereign soul responsible for the sleep. The rest, the gums, the fats, the sugars, are merely the cage. He intends to break the cage and free the bird. Watch him now as he moves through the laboratory. The silence is profound, broken only by the hiss of the gas burner and the bubbling of liquid in a flask. He is performing a process that sits on the razor's edge between the old alchemy and the new chemistry. He takes the raw opium, a dark, tar-like substance that smells of earth and bitterness. He dissolves it in acid, watching the water turn murky and brown. He is washing away the plant matter, the debris of biology. It is a slow, tedious process, requiring the patience of a saint. He heats the mixture, stirs it, filters it through paper, staring at the drips as if reading the future. He treats the solution with ammonia, a sharp, pungent reagent that acts as a chemical key. He is manipulating the pH, shifting the balance of the liquid universe in his flask. He is searching for the precise moment of precipitation, the moment when the ghost will decide to reveal itself. Night after night he repeats this ritual. He is a solitary figure in the moonlight, a magician of the molecule. He fails and fails again. The mixture remains stubborn, a soup of confusion. But Serturner possesses the stubbornness of youth and the intuition of genius. He believes that the alkaloid, a word that barely existed then, is alkaline, a base, similar to the salts of ammonia. This was a radical thought, a heresy against the established science of the time, which believed that plant extracts were only acidic. Then, one night, the breakthrough comes. It happens quietly, without fanfare. The liquid in the flask begins to cloud. As it cools, something miraculous occurs at the bottom of the vessel. Out of the brown murk, white particles begin to fall like snow in a winter forest. They settle, accumulating in a pristine layer. Friedrich holds the flask up to the candle. His breath catches in his throat. He sees them. Crystals. They are not the jagged shards of salt or the dull powder of chalk. They are translucent, geometric, perfect. They catch the yellow light of the flame and hold it, glowing with an inner luminescence. He has done the impossible. He has isolated the active principle of the poppy. He has stripped away the plant, the soil, the sun, and the rain, leaving only the pure, distilled essence of sleep. He carefully filters the crystals, washing them until they are white as milk, white as bone. He places a few grains on his tongue. The taste is incredibly bitter, a bitterness that seems to penetrate the very nerves of the jaw. It is the taste of concentrated power. But what is this substance? To know it, he must name it. And to name it, he looks back into the mists of antiquity, to the mythology that understood the power of sleep better than any science. He thinks of Ovid's Metamorphoses. He thinks of the dark cave where the god of sleep, Hypnos, resided, a place where the sun never rose, where no cock crowed, where the river Lethe flowed with a murmuring sound that invited slumber. In that cave lived the sons of sleep, the Oneiroi, the shapers of dreams. And the greatest of these was Morpheus. Morpheus, the shaper of forms. Morpheus, who drifted through the night on silent wings, mimicking the shapes of men to walk in their dreams. Morpheus, who held a bouquet of poppies and touched the eyelids of the weary with their petals. It was a name heavy with poetry, heavy with the weight of the unconscious. Friedrich looks at the white crystals in his dish and whispers the name, Morphium. Later, it would be anglicized to morphine. He had captured a god in a jar. But the story of the alchemist does not end with the discovery. In the tradition of the time, the scientist was the first test subject. There were no clinical trials, no ethics committees. There was only the man and his molecule. Sir Turner needed to know the strength of this god he had caged. Picture the scene a few nights later. Friedrich gathers 3 friends, brave souls, or perhaps merely young and reckless, in the back room of the apothecary. The atmosphere is tense, charged with a mixture of scientific curiosity and primal fear. He measures out the crystals, a grain, then another. He dissolves them in alcohol and water. They drink the bitter draught. The candle flickers. They wait. At first, there is nothing but the taste. Then, the warmth begins. It starts in the stomach, a glowing ember that spreads outward to the limbs. The pain of the day, the stiffness of the muscles, the small anxieties of life, they all begin to recede, washing away like sandcastles in a rising tide. The heartbeat slows, the breath becomes shallow and rhythmic. The eyelids grow heavy, as if weighted with lead coins. But then, the dosage takes its toll. The god Morpheus is not a gentle master. The heaviness becomes a crushing weight. The limbs feel paralyzed. The mind begins to drift, untethered from the anchor of the body. They fall into a deep, comatose slumber. It is not the refreshing sleep of the innocent. It is a descent into the underworld. Friedrich fights to stay conscious, to observe, to record. But the shadows lengthen. His pulse flutters like a trapped bird. The room spins. They are on the verge of death, hovering at the threshold where sleep becomes eternal. It is only through the desperate intervention of inducing vomiting, of splashing cold water, of walking the numb bodies around the room for hours, that they survive the night. When the dawn finally breaks, gray and cold over the rooftops of Paderborn, Friedrich is exhausted, pale, and shaken. But he is also triumphant. He knows now. He knows that the crystals are potent beyond measure. He knows that he has found the principium somniferum, the sleep maker. He has separated the medicine from the poison, or rather, he has concentrated the poison to make it a medicine. This was the birth of modern pharmacology. Before this moment, medicine was a broth of leaves and barks, a hopeful wager against disease. After this moment, medicine became a bullet, a precise, measured, chemical projectile aimed at a specific receptor in the body. Sir Turner had proven that plants were not magical holes, but chemical factories containing specific machines. He taught humanity that we could dismantle the factory and take only the machine we needed. Yet, as he gazed at the jar of white crystals in the morning light, he could not see the long shadow that stretched out from it. He could not see the future. He could not see the American Civil War, decades away, where the soldier's disease would sweep through the camps. He could not see the glass syringes that would be invented to deliver this white god directly into the blood. He could not see the millions of souls who would find themselves trapped in the embrace of Morpheus, unable to wake up, trading their pain for a hunger that could never be filled. The duality of the discovery is the tragedy of the human condition. Pain is the oldest enemy of life. To banish pain is a divine act. Morphine was the greatest kindness ever bestowed upon the suffering. It soothed the dying, quieted the screaming of the wounded, and brought peace to the agony of the sick. It was, in truth, God's own medicine. But to banish pain is also to banish the warning systems of the soul. The crystals offered a blanket of snow under which the spirit could freeze. The relief it promised was so absolute, so profound, that reality itself became unbearable by comparison. The alchemist had sought to extract the soul of the poppy, but in doing so, he had created a substance that would demand the souls of men in return. The years passed. Friedrich Serturner grew older. He received honors and degrees, though he remained a somewhat melancholic figure, forever tied to his discovery. The world changed around him. The Industrial Revolution roared into life with its steam engines and factories. But in the hospitals and the quiet rooms of the dying, the silence of the apothecary remained. The white crystals traveled the globe, carried in the bags of doctors, the pockets of soldiers, and the secret stashes of the desperate. The Morpheus in the jar was a shapeshifter, true to his name. To the surgeon, he was a miracle, a tool that allowed the knife to cut without cruelty. To the addict, he was a monstera lover who demanded everything and gave nothing but dust. Let us return to that night in 1804. The candle has burned low. The flask is cooling. The young apprentice sits alone in the silence. Outside, the moon hangs high over Germany, casting a silver light on the cobblestones. The world is asleep, dreaming its natural dreams. But inside the glass, the artificial dream waits. It glitters with a cold, indifferent beauty. It is a pivotal moment in the biography of our species. We had learned to distill the essence of the earth. We had learned to hold a molecule in our hands. We had unlocked the door to the chemical manipulation of consciousness. And as Friedrich Serturner corked the bottle, sealing the white ghost inside, the sound was barely a whisper, a tiny friction of glass against glass. But in the silence of history, it rang like a bell. The age of the herbalist was ending. The age of the alkaloid had begun. And deep within the structure of that white crystal, the atoms vibrated with a dark promise. I will take away your pain, but I will never let you go. The narrative moves now from the stone and the mortar to the flesh and the blood. The genie is out of the bottle. The sacred breath of the Ma Huang gave us energy. The frozen sleep of the poppy gave us oblivion. These are the two poles of the human desire, to be more than we are, and to be nothing at all, to run forever, and to sleep forever. As the 19th century unfolds, these two forces, the stimulant and the narcotic, begin their dance across the stage of history. They will meet in the trenches of wars, in the parlors of the elite, and in the slums of the forgotten. They will build empires of commerce and destroy the empires of the mind. But for now, let the snow fall in the glass. Let the young man marvel at his creation. Let the silence hold for just a moment longer. For Morpheus has entered the room, and he has brought his shadows with him. The long night of addiction has not yet begun, but the sun has set on the era of innocence. The crystal is pure, the intent is noble, but the chemistry is merciless. In the hands of the alchemist, the poison became the cure, and in the veins of the world, the cure would slowly, quietly, become the plague. The history of the shadow has turned another page, written in the white ink of the poppy. The narrative of the crystal now shifts its gaze. We leave the cobblestone streets of Europe and the dimly lit apothecaries of the West. We traverse the great curvature of the earth, moving eastward over the vast, breathing body of the Pacific Ocean. Here, the water stretches endlessly, a blue desert that separates continents and consumes history. We arrive at the archipelago of Japan, the land of the rising sun, where the ancient codes of the samurai were being welded onto the chassis of the industrial machine. It is the 1940s. The world is engulfed in the flames of the Second Great War. But in the laboratories of Tokyo and Osaka, the fire was of a different nature. It was a cold, chemical fire. The molecule that Nagai Nagayoshi had isolated, and that Akira Ogata had refined into crystalline perfection, had found a new name and a new purpose. In the West, it was a tool of the Blitzkrieg. Here, in the East, it was christened Philippon. The name itself carries a tragic poetry, a linguistic irony that echoes through the decades. It was derived from the Greek Philipponis, meaning he who loves labor. It was a name chosen with the bright, optimistic branding of the early 20th century. It promised a love of work, a tireless devotion to the task at hand. It was marketed not as a drug, but as a fuel for the national spirit. In the advertisements of the time, it was hailed as a cure for drowsiness, a banished of fatigue, a tablet that would allow the student to study longer, the factory worker to produce more, and the nation to march faster towards its destiny. But as the war turned, as the skies grew dark with the smoke of burning cities, the love of labor transformed into something far more desperate. The love of labor became the love of death. Picture, if you will, the atmosphere of the Japanese home front in the twilight years of the war. The islands are under siege. The blockade has strangled the supply lines. Food is scarce. Rice is a luxury. The air is thick with the sirens of air raids. Yet the factories must not stop. The assembly lines of the Mitsubishi and Nakajima aircraft plants must keep moving. Who is manning these lines? It is the women, the elderly, and the high school students, the mobilized innocents of the nation. To keep their hands moving, to keep their eyes open through the double shifts and the malnutrition, the government distributed the Philippon. It came in small boxes stamped with the insignia of the rising sun. It was the energy of the state, crystallized. The weary girl, polishing the lens of a bomb sight, would swallow the tablet and feel the exhaustion drain away, replaced by a buzzing, artificial clarity. The hunger in her belly would fade, silenced by the chemical command to work. The nation was consuming itself to feed the war, and the crystal was the spoon with which it ate. But it is not in the factory that the story of Philippon reaches its most haunting crescendo. We must look higher. We must look to the sky. As the perimeter of the empire collapsed, as the American fleets drew closer to the sacred home islands, the military strategy shifted from conquest to sacrifice. The logic of survival was replaced by the logic of the divine wind, the kamikaze. This was a desperate tactic, born of a belief that the spirit could overcome steel. It called for young men, often barely out of their teens, to transform themselves into human guidance systems, to fuse their bodies with their machines and hurl themselves against the encroaching armada. These were the special attack units, and to prepare a human soul for such an act, to override the deepest, most primal biological imperative, the will to live, the empire turned to the needle and the vial. Imagine the scene at an airfield in Kyushu in the spring of 1945. The air is heavy with the scent of cherry blossoms, the sakura. In the Japanese psyche, the cherry blossom is the perfect metaphor for the warrior, beautiful, fragile, and destined to fall at the peak of its bloom, without withering on the branch. It is a noble aesthetic, but an aesthetic is a fragile thing when faced with the terrifying reality of death. The pilots are gathered in the barracks. They are writing their final letters home. They are cutting locks of their hair and fingernails to leave behind for their families, poor substitutes for the bodies that will never return. The atmosphere is a strange mixture of stoicism and terror. These are not unthinking machines. They are boys who love poetry, who miss their mothers, who dream of girls they will never marry. The fear is a physical weight in the room, a cold fog that settles in the lungs. Then the medical officers arrive. They bring with them the storm of the spirit. The Philippon administered to these pilots was often of a much higher purity and dosage than the tablets given to the factory workers. It was frequently injected, a direct line to the blood. This was the injection ceremony, a ritual as solemn as the pouring of the final cup of sake. Watch as the needle pierces the skin. The liquid enters the vein. Within seconds, the chemical rushes to the brain. The effect is immediate and profound. The boy, who was trembling, whose stomach was knotted with nausea, whose mind was racing with thoughts of death, suddenly feels a change. The fear does not exactly vanish, rather it is pushed behind a thick glass wall. A surge of icy confidence floods the nervous system. The heart beats with a rhythmic, mechanical power. The mind clears. The doubts, the memories of home, the soft face of the mother, they are all stripped away, bleached out by the white light of the amphetamine. The drug induces a state of hyper-focus, a tunnel vision where the only reality is the mission. It creates a sensation of invincibility, a detachment from the flesh. The pilot looks at his hands and sees the hands of a statue, steady and firm. He looks at the plane and sees not a coffin but a chariot. The Philippon whispers to him that he is already dead, that he is already a spirit, and therefore he has nothing to fear. They walk to the tarmac. The engines of the Zero fighters are coughing into life, spitting blue smoke. The sound is deafening, a physical vibration that rattles the teeth. But the pilot, insulated by the crystal in his blood, feels calm. He climbs onto the wing. He steps into the cockpit. The cockpit of a Zero is a small, cramped space. It smells of high-octane aviation fuel, oil, and sweat. It is a cage of aluminum and plexiglass. As the canopy slides shut, the pilot is sealed into his fate. He is now one with the machine. The drug acts as the interface, blurring the line between the man's nervous system and the aircraft's controls. The takeoff is a roar of motion. The earth falls away. They climb into the clouds, a formation of doomed flowers seeking the storm. Up here, in the thin air, the effects of the methamphetamine intensify. The love of labor becomes the love of the end. The pilot's eyes are dilated, the pupils wide black discs drinking in the light. He does not blink. He scans the vast, terrifying blue of the ocean stretching endlessly below. The water looks like a wrinkled sheet of metal. Somewhere on that horizon lies the enemy fleet, the steel cities of the Americans. The flight can take hours. In a normal state, the mind would wander. The terror would return. The survival instinct would scream, begging the hands to turn the stick, to fly away, to ditch in the water. But the crystal holds the mind in a vice grip. It locks the attention forward. It suppresses the appetite, the thirst, and the fatigue. It suspends time. The pilot exists in an eternal present, a high-frequency vibration of duty and chemical euphoria. They called this state the shudder of the joy of death. It was a lie, of course. It was a chemically induced psychosis, a weaponization of the brain's reward pathways. The tragedy is that the empire had to steal the souls of its children before it sacrificed their bodies. It had to drug them to make them heroes. Then the target is sighted. The American ships are small gray shapes on the water, trailing wakes of white foam. The sky fills with black puffs of anti-aircraft fire. The flak. It is a wall of shrapnel and noise. The pilot initiates the dive. This is the moment of the falling sun. Gravity takes hold. The speed increases. The wind screams over the canopy. The G-forces pull at the body, draining the blood from the head. But the methamphetamine keeps the blood pressure high, keeps the consciousness razor-sharp. The tunnel vision narrows until there is nothing in the universe but the deck of the aircraft carrier. In those final seconds, what does the pilot see? Does he see the glory of the Emperor? Does he see the faces of his ancestors? Or does he see only the geometry of the impact, calculated by a brain that has been turned into a computer. The drug denies us the answer. It denies the pilot his final human moment of reflection. It forces him to keep his eyes open, to stare into the abyss without blinking, until the flash of impact obliterates the world. It was a tragedy written in chemistry, a stimulant meant to enhance life, to help the asthmatic breathe, to help the worker build, was used to embrace the void. It sent thousands of young men into the ocean, their bodies fueled by a synthetic courage that was as artificial as it was potent. But the story of the divine wind does not end with the explosion. There were pilots who returned. Perhaps the engine failed. Perhaps they could not find the target. Perhaps the weather turned. They landed back at the airfields, the drug still coursing through their veins, but the mission unfulfilled. For them, the horror was different. As the drug wore off, the crash would descend. The chemical god would leave the body, leaving behind a hollow shell. The fear would return, magnified 1,000 times by the depletion of dopamine. The shame of survival would mix with the physiological depression of the withdrawal. They were ghosts who had failed to die, wandering the ruins of the airfields, haunted by the friends who had vanished into the fire. And then, the war ended. The Emperor spoke on the radio, his voice high and thin, announcing the surrender. The divine wind ceased to blow. The factories stopped. The planes were grounded and scrapped. But the Philippon remained. The military had stockpiled vast quantities of the drug. Warehouses were filled with millions of ampules and tablets, waiting for a final battle that never came. In the chaos of the defeat, these stockpiles were not destroyed. They were unleashed. They spilled out of the military depots and into the black markets of the shattered nation. The love of labor flowed into the streets of post-war Japan. It found a people who were starving, defeated, and psychologically broken. They had lost their cities, their families, and their god-emperor's divinity. They were living in the ruins, scavenging for survival. They needed something to numb the pain, something to give them the energy to rebuild from the ashes. The crystal offered them a false resurrection. It became the fuel of the reconstruction, but also the scourge of the peace. The Philippon Age began, a period of widespread addiction where the spectral energy of the war continued to vibrate in the nervous systems of the survivors. The artists, the writers, the laborers, the prostitutes, all sought the comfort of the needle. The drug that had been used to help men die was now being used to help them bear the unbearable weight of living. We look back at the Pacific Theater and we see the smoke, the fire, and the steel. But we must also see the invisible layer, the chemical layer. We must see the molecules of methamphetamine floating in the bloodstream of the history. We must acknowledge that the courage of the kamikaze was, in part, a synthesized product, a manipulation of the brain's chemistry. This does not diminish the tragedy, it deepens it. It shows us that in the total war of the modern age, nothing is sacred, not even the human mind. The soul itself is drafted, equipped, and expended like a bullet. The sun sets over the ocean. The waves wash over the wreckage of the planes that lie deep in the abyss. The water is cold and dark. But somewhere in the sediment of history, the memory of the crystal remains, a testament to the time when we turned the sacred breath into the wind of death, and sent our children to sleep in the deep, with eyes that the drug would not allow to close. The silence returns to the Pacific, but it is a haunted silence. The wind still whispers the name, Philippon, Philippon, the love of labor, the labor of death, the falling sun. The great cannons of the world finally cooled, their iron barrels contracting in the silence of the surrender. The skies, once crisscrossed by the contrails of bombers and the frantic arcs of the dogfighters, returned to the birds and the clouds. The smoke that had choked the cities of Europe and Asia drifted away, revealing a world scarred, broken, but ready to be reborn. It was 1945, and then 1950. The era of the Pax Americana was dawning. The soldiers returned home, trading their olive drab uniforms for gray flannel suits. The rivets of the battleships were melted down to build refrigerators and automobiles. The world took a deep breath, desperate to inhale the sweet air of peace. But chemistry does not recognize treaties. A molecule does not know the difference between war and peace. It knows only the receptor it binds to, the nerve it stimulates, the fire it lights within the blood. The ghost that had been conjured in the laboratories of the 19th century, the spirit that had flown with the Kamikaze and marched with the Panzer divisions, did not simply vanish when the ink dried on the surrender documents. It was too potent, too profitable, and too deeply embedded in the industrial machinery of the age. The surplus of war spilled into the quiet streets of the New World. The stockpiles of ampules and tablets, mountains of crystallized energy manufactured for the trenches, needed a new battlefield. And so, the pharmaceutical giants, the modern alchemists of commerce, performed a sleight of hand. They took the demon of the battlefield, washed the blood from its hands, and dressed it in a domestic mask. They gave it new names, softer names, names that sounded like science and salvation. Methadrine, dexedrine, obitrol. They looked at the new society being built, a society of suburbs, of gleaming appliances, of manicured lawns and nuclear families, and they saw a different kind of war. It was a war against entropy, against mess, against fatigue, and, perhaps most significantly, against fat. The demand for productivity was insatiable. The modern world was a machine that required a tireless operator. The atomic age promised a future of speed and efficiency, and the human body, with its primitive need for 8 hours of sleep and its tendency to sag and slow, was the only obsolescence in the system. And so, the crystal hummed in the medicine cabinets behind the picket fences. It moved from the soldier's rucksack to the housewife's purse. It became the domesticated ghost. Picture, if you will, the archetype of this era, the American suburb in the mid-1950s. It is a landscape of aggressive normalcy. The sun shines with a technicolor brightness on the rows of identical houses. The grass is an impossible green. The cars in the driveways are vast, chromed beasts with tail fins like rockets. Inside these homes, the curtains are drawn against the heat of the day, creating a cool, dim sanctuary. In the kitchen, surrounded by the hum of the electric refrigerator and the smell of lemon floor wax, stands the woman of the house. She is the curator of the American dream. Society expects her to be perfect, a loving mother, a devoted wife, a chef, a cleaner, a socialite, and a beauty queen, all within the span of a single waking day. Her waist must be narrow, her smile must be bright, and her energy must be boundless. But she is human. She is tired. The children are loud, the laundry is endless, and the silence of the suburbs can be deafening. She opens the cupboard. There, in a small amber bottle, prescribed by a doctor who smiled paternally and told her it would help with her blues or her weight, lies the answer. The tiny, heart-shaped tablet. The mother's little helper, though that title would often be shared with the sedatives. But for the morning, for the work, she needs the stimulant. She swallows the ghost. Let us trace the journey of the molecule in this new, domestic setting. It dissolves in the stomach, entering the bloodstream just as it did for the pilot over the Pacific. But the context has changed. There is no enemy ship on the horizon, only a sink full of dishes. There is no fear of death, only the fear of judgment, the fear of not being enough. As the drug hits the brain, the lights go on. The fatigue that clung to her limbs like wet wool evaporates. A tingle of pleasure, of capability, washes over the scalp. The dopamine floods the synapses, whispering the same lie it told the soldier. You are invincible. You are efficient. You are a god of order. Suddenly, the house is not a prison of chores, but a canvas for her energy. She moves with a frantic, balletic grace. The vacuum cleaner becomes a weapon of righteousness, sucking up the dust of the world. The iron glides over the shirts, pressing them into geometric perfection. She scrubs the linoleum until it shines like a mirror, until she can see her own dilated pupils reflected in the floor. The hunger in her belly, The natural signal of the body asking for fuel is suppressed, crushed into a mere whisper. She does not need food, she feeds on the crystal. She is slimming down, melting away, becoming the slender silhouette that the fashion magazines demand. It feels like magic. It feels like the promise of the future delivered in a pill. She can host the bridge club, bake the cake, pick up the children, and greet her husband with a fresh coat of lipstick and a martini in hand, all without a single yawn. The drug allows her to perform the role of the happy housewife to absolute perfection. But let us look closer. Let us peel back the skin of this manicured reality. The energy is not real. It is a loan taken out against the future of the nervous system, with a compound interest that is ruinous. The PEP pills created a generation that vibrated with a nervous, hollow frequency. Under the influence, the conversation flows rapidly, but it lacks depth. The words tumble out, disconnected and shiny, like marbles spilling on a hardwood floor. The jaw tightens. The teeth grind together in a subtle, rhythmic bruxism. The hands, while busy, have a slight tremor. The eyes of the domesticated ghost are wide, but they are dry. The blink rate slows. It is the stare of a predator scanning for prey, but the prey is merely a speck of dust on the mantle. The emotional landscape flattens. The drug mimics the chemistry of excitement and joy, but it is a joy without content. It is a chemical happiness that exists independently of the events of the woman's life. She feels good, not because her child laughed or because the sun is shining, but because the molecule is forcing her neurons to fire. And then there is the night. The human animal is a creature of the sun and the moon. We are designed to rise with the light and fall with the dark. Sleep is not merely a pause, it is a biological sacrament. It is the time when the brain washes itself, when memories are consolidated, when the spirit repairs the tears in the fabric of the self. It is in the deep, rapid eye movement sleep, the dream state, that we process our emotions, that we confront our shadows, that we remain human. The ghost in the pill jar stole this from the suburbs. Even when the work was done, the chemical fire continued to burn. The husband would return home to find a wife who was wired, whose chatter was brittle, who moved with a jagged intensity. When the lights were finally extinguished, sleep would not come. The body lay in the bed, but the mind was still racing, spinning its wheels in the mud of stimulation. If sleep did come, it was a shallow, black unconsciousness, devoid of dreams. The drug suppresses REM sleep. It blocks the door to the dream world. Night after night, month after month, the deficit grew. A dreamless sleep is not a restful sleep. It is a form of suspended animation. The soul, starved of its nightly journey into the unconscious, begins to fray. The melancholy that the doctor prescribed the pills to cure begins to return, but now it is darker, sharper. It is the paranoia of the exhausted mind. The shadows in the corner of the nursery begin to look menacing. The sound of the wind in the eaves sounds like a whisper. The perfection of the house begins to feel like a suffocating oppression. The woman looks in the mirror and sees the weight loss, yes, but she also sees a gauntness, a hardness in the features. The sparkle in the eye has become a glint of desperation. This was the hidden tragedy of the 1950s and 60s. We look back at the photographs of that era, the Kodachrome smiles, the picnics, the pristine living rooms, and we see an image of contentment. But for millions, that contentment was chemically sustained. The golden age of the American middle class was, in part, fueled by the same substance that had driven the Blitzkrieg. The ghost had simply traded the tank for the station wagon. And it was not just the housewife. The demon wore many masks. Consider the long-haul truck driver, the modern navigator of the asphalt oceans. The interstate highway system was being built, a vast concrete web connecting the coasts. The economy demanded that goods move faster, always faster. The driver, sitting high in his cab, the rumble of the diesel engine vibrating through his bones, faced the endless ribbon of the road at night. The hypnotic rhythm of the white lines, the darkness closing in. This was the enemy. He too turned to the Benny, the Black Beauty, the West Coast turnaround. The pills were sold at truck stops, under the counter, a secret sacrament of the road. With the crystal in his system, the driver could punch a hole through the night. He could drive for 20, 30 hours without stopping. The hallucinations that plagued the exhausted mind, the black dog that drivers claimed to see running across the road, were kept at bay, or perhaps induced, by the drug. He became a machine of commerce, eyes pinned to the headlights, fueling the economic boom with his own sleeplessness. Consider the student, the architect, the mathematician, the intellectual workers of the Cold War. They were told that the mind was a computer, and that this drug was the overclocking mechanism. Paul Erdős, the prolific mathematician, famously worked on amphetamines, churning out theorems like a factory. When he stopped, he claimed the mathematics stopped too. The drug had intertwined itself with the creative spark, making the users believe that their genius was dependent on the crystal. But the most insidious aspect of this era was the medical sanction. This was not a back-alley transaction. This was the doctor's orders. The figure of the physician in the 1950s was almost godlike, a man of science, trusted implicitly. If he wrote the script, it must be safe. It must be good. The pharmaceutical companies produced glossy brochures depicting happy, slender, energetic people, their lives transformed by the pill. They did not show the crash. They did not show the psychosis. They did not show the woman weeping in the bathroom at 3 a.m., holding the empty bottle, terrified of the dawn. The duality of the substance was never more deceptive. On the surface, it was a tool of civilization. It helped build the suburbs, clean the homes, drive the trucks, and write the books. It was the vitamin of the modern age. But underneath, it was carving out the capacity for genuine rest. It was creating a culture of manic denial. The hollow energy of the amphetamine user is a specific, tragic vibration. It is the energy of a puppet whose strings are being pulled too tight. There is no center to it, no groundedness. It is all forward motion, all reaction. The user loses the ability to sit still, to be silent, to simply be. To stop moving is to feel the crushing weight of the accumulated exhaustion, so they must keep moving. They must take another pill to get up, and perhaps a sleeping pill to come down. The uppers and the downers, the chemical roller coaster that replaced the natural rhythm of the sun and the moon. As the decade wore on, the cracks began to show. The nervous breakdown became a common phrase in the suburban lexicon. The tired housewife became a cliché. The veneer of perfection began to blister. The children of this generation, watching their parents vibrate with this artificial energy, watching the mood swings and the tight smiles, began to sense that something was wrong. They saw the ghost at the dinner table. They saw the emptiness behind the eyes. This domesticated ghost was perhaps more dangerous than the soldier's ghost because it was invisible. On the battlefield, the horror is explicit. In the suburbs, it was hidden behind the drawn curtains. It was a private plague, suffered in isolation. The woman who felt her mind unraveling believed she was the only one, that she was failing as a wife and mother. She did not know that her neighbor, 3 doors down, was swallowing the same pill, fighting the same shadows. The chemistry had colonized the home. It had turned the sanctuary of peace into a factory of efficiency. It had commodified wakefulness. We had tried to banish the little death of sleep, only to find that we were banishing the little life of the dream. We were turning ourselves into automatons, fueled by a synthetic star, burning bright and fast, leaving behind a residue of ash that no amount of scrubbing could remove. The 1950s are often remembered as a time of innocence, a golden twilight before the storms of the 1960s. But if we listen closely to the history, we can hear the hum of the crystal. We can hear the grinding of the teeth. We can hear the rattle of the pill bottle in the purse. It was a decade on speed, a society running a race against itself, powered by a drug that promised everything and took the only thing that really mattered. The the peace of the soul. The ghost had not left the world when the war ended. It had just changed its uniform. It had learned to smile. And in that smile, in that bright, brittle, chemical grin, lay the seeds of the next crisis. For a society that cannot sleep is a society that will eventually go mad. The domesticated ghost was getting restless. It was growing stronger, and soon it would burst out of the medicine cabinet and into the streets again, no longer wearing the mask of the helper, but revealing the face of the destroyer. But for now, the house is quiet. The floor shines. The dinner is ready. The woman takes one last look in the mirror, swallows the dryness in her throat, and walks out to greet her family. The ghost walks with her, invisible and consuming, a silent guest at the feast of the American dream. The sun sets, but the lights in the eyes do not dim. The long, sleepless night of the modern age continues. The wheel of history, which had turned so smoothly in the sterilized grooves of the pharmacy, now begins to wobble. We leave the manicured lawns of the suburbs and the hushed corridors of the medical clinics. We enter a time of reckoning. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the medical establishment, like a sorcerer who finally sees the monster he has summoned, began to recoil. The doctors, once so generous with their script pads, looked at the hollow eyes of their patients, the trembling hands of the speed freaks in the waiting rooms, and realized the pact they had made with the shadow. The laws changed. The Controlled Substances Act fell like a portcullis. The pharmaceutical taps were turned off. The gleaming white tablets of methadone and dexedrine, once as common as aspirin, vanished from the shelves. The mother's little helper was evicted from the medicine cabinet. But you cannot legislate an appetite. You cannot outlaw a hunger that has been woven into the neural pathways of a generation. When the legal supply withered, the demand did not die. It simply migrated. The drug was cast out of the city of science and into the wilderness of the outlaw. It was a second exile. First, it had left the plant. Now, it left the laboratory. It was forced to find a new home, not in the sterile glass of the beaker, but in the grime of the garage and the dust of the desert. This is the era of the great migration of the molecule. It moved from the hands of men like Nagai and Ogataman of degrees and discipline into the hands of the rogue chemist, the biker, the wanderer. It found its sanctuary in the vast, empty spaces of the American West, where the law was a distant rumor and the horizon stretched forever. Picture the landscape. The American Southwest, a world of red rock, sagebrush, and silence. The sun beats down with an indifferent fury, bleaching the bones of the earth. At night, the temperature drops, and the moon rises like a silver coin, turning the sand into a ghostly ocean. Here, in the solitude of the canyons, hidden from the prying eyes of the authorities, the chemistry grew dirty. The sophisticated synthesis of the past, the elegant reduction of ephedrine using precise laboratory equipment, was replaced by something feral. This was the birth of bathtub speed, of crank. The name itself is a piece of folklore, a jagged artifact of the time. It is said the bikers would hide the raw methamphetamine in the crankcases of their motorcycles, the heat of the engine drying the powder as they roared down the highways. The drug became infused with the spirit of the machine oil, gasoline, steel, and speed. Imagine a shack nestled in a dry riverbed, miles from the nearest paved road. The windows are covered with tin foil. Inside, the air is thick with fumes that would kill a lesser creature. The smell is distinct, a chemical stench of cat urine, ammonia, and ether that clings to the skin and burns the lungs. This is the new laboratory. There are no white coats here, no sterile protocols. There are only glass jars, rubber tubing, and volatile chemicals stolen from hardware stores and farms. The cook is a figure of this new underworld. He is a wizard of the waste, a man who has learned the dangerous art of turning over-the-counter cold medicine and pool chemicals into a potent neurotoxin. He works with a cigarette dangling from his lip, surrounded by the constant threat of explosion. The Nazi method, the red phosphorus method, These recipes circulate in handwritten notes, passed from hand to hand like dark spells. The chemistry here is stripped of its medical disguise. It is no longer trying to heal asthma or cure obesity. It is designed for one purpose: to obliterate reality. The product that emerges from these improvised labs is not the pristine white crystal of the 19th century. It is often yellow, brown, or pink, smelling of solvent. It is peanut butter crank, sticky and crude. But it is powerful. It is raw, jagged energy, unbuffered by safety or regulation. The users of this era were not the housewives in pearls. They were the outlaws. The motorcycle gangs, the Hells Angels, the pagans, adopted the drug as their sacrament. For the rider, the drug was a tool of survival and dominance. To ride a chopper for 18 hours straight, through rain and wind, requires a stamina that flesh alone cannot provide. The crank turned the rider into a centaur, half man, half machine, impervious to pain and exhaustion. But it was more than just fuel for the road. It was a rejection of the slow, rhythmic pace of ordinary life. The 1960s had preached peace and love, expanding the mind with psychedelics. The speed culture of the 1970s was the dark inverse of that dream. It wasn't about expanding the mind. It was about sharpening it into a weapon. It wasn't about peace. It was about aggression, action, and velocity. The speed freak became a new archetype of the night. Picture a figure standing in the fluorescent glare of an all-night gas station in the middle of the Nevada desert. His skin is pale, almost translucent. He is thin, his body consumed by its own metabolism. He is taking apart a carburetor on the hood of a car, his hands moving with a frantic, blurring speed. He talks to himself, a rapid-fire monologue of conspiracies and plans. He has been awake for 4 days. This is the run. The cycle of use that defines the methamphetamine experience. Unlike the housewife who took a pill to get through the day and slept, however poorly, at night, the canyon user seeks to escape the cycle of day and night entirely. They chase the high for days, injecting or snorting the drug again and again, pushing the body into a brittle state of existence. Sleep becomes the enemy. Sleep is the little death that steals time. The user wants to be awake forever, to live 10 lifetimes in the span of a week. But the human brain is not built for infinite wakefulness. As the days pass, the neurotransmitters dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine are depleted. The brain begins to misfire. The desert landscape begins to warp. The Joshua trees with their twisted limbs look like grasping hands. The shadows of the rocks begin to move. The sound of the wind becomes a voice. Paranoia sets in. This is tweaking. The user believes they are being watched. They dismantle their radios, their engines, their walls, searching for the listening devices that aren't there. They pick at their skin, convinced that there are bugs crawling beneath the surface, the meth mites, a tactile hallucination born of toxic nerves. The canyon becomes a psychological landscape as much as a physical one. It is a place of profound isolation. The drug promises a connection to a higher voltage of life, but it delivers a solitary confinement within the skull. The camaraderie of the biker gang dissolves into individual fortresses of suspicion. Violence flares suddenly, fueled by sleep deprivation and the aggression of the chemical. A look, a word, can trigger a psychotic rage. And yet, there is a tragic romance to this descent. It is the romance of the frontier, of the individual against the world. These were men and women who felt cast out by society, who did not fit into the boxes of the 9 to 5. They went to the edges of the map. They sought a power that would make them feel like gods in a world that treated them like refuse. The crank gave them that power, if only for a few days. It made them feel kingly in their shacks, brilliant in their garages, invincible on their highways. But the bill always comes due. The crash in the canyon is a devastating event. When the drug finally runs out, or the body simply collapses, the user falls into a dark, comatose sleep that can last for days. They wake up starving, dehydrated, their muscles aching, their minds steeped in a depression so black it feels like a physical weight. And in that darkness, the only light is the memory of the high. The only way out is to cook again, to ride again. The drug had changed. It was no longer the sacred breath of the Ma Huang. It was no longer the Philippon of the Patriot. It was now a feral beast living in the shadows of the American dream. It had become a substance of the night, fueled by rebellion and the desire to escape the limits of time. This era of the biker meth was a bridge. It bridged the gap between the pharmaceutical age and the modern cartel age. It taught the underworld how to synthesize the drug. It democratized the chemistry of addiction. It proved that you didn't need a PhD to make a monster. You only needed a recipe and a disregard for safety. As we look at the vast, moonlit desert, we must understand that this was not just a criminal enterprise. It was a cultural convulsion. It was the scream of the marginalized, amplified by chemistry. It was the sound of an engine revving until it redlined, until the pistons shattered. The wind blows through the canyons, carrying the scent of sage and the faint, acrid smell of ether. The shack is empty now, perhaps burned down in a chemical fire, leaving only blackened wood and broken glass. But the ghost of the canyon remains. The legacy of the crank era is written in the geography of the American West, in the lonely highways and the hidden valleys. It was here that the drug learned to survive without the law. It was here that it learned to be wild. And from this wildness, a new and even darker chapter would emerge. The improvised labs of the desert were just the beginning. The appetite was growing. The shadow was lengthening. The descent into the canyons was not the bottom. It was merely a plateau on the way down to a deeper, more industrialized hell. But for a moment, let us hold the image of the lone rider, roaring down a ribbon of asphalt under a harvest moon, his veins filled with fire, running from the sunrise, chasing a horizon that will never let him rest. The journey through history and chemistry brings us at last to the most terrifying landscape of all. It is not a place found on any map, nor a battlefield marked by coordinates. It is the interior geography of the collapsing mind. We have seen how the molecule conquers fatigue, how it accelerates the heart, and how it fuels the machinery of war and industry. But now, we must look at what happens when the fuel burns too hot, for too long. We arrive at the psychological twilight, the unique and specific horror that methamphetamine inflicts upon the human soul. This is the realm of the sleepless. This is the domain of the shadow people. To understand this place, one must first understand the sanctity of sleep. Sleep is not merely an absence of wakefulness. It is a biological ocean, a deep, restorative tide that washes over the brain each night. In the dark waters of REM sleep, the mind sorts its memories, cleanses its toxins, and reconciles the emotions of the day. It is the anchor that holds the human psyche to the bedrock of reality. But the crystal is a thief of tides. It dams the ocean. It forces the sun to stay in the sky for days on end, creating a scorching, artificial noon that dries up the inner sea. When a human being is kept awake for 3, 4, 5 days, the architecture of the brain begins to buckle. The barrier between the conscious world and the subconscious underworld starts to thin. The dreaming mind, desperate for release, begins to leak into the waking world. It is a slow, creeping erosion of the truth. It begins in the periphery. Picture a room in the deep silence of the third night. The user is alone. The initial euphoria of the drug has long since faded into a jagged, vibrating tension. The body is exhausted, a cage of aching bones and tight muscles, but the mind is wired shut, unable to close its eye. The air in the room feels thick, charged with a static electricity that prickles the skin. And then, movement. Just at the edge of vision, in the corner of the eye, a shape darts. It is fluid, dark, faster than a thought. The head snaps to look, but there is nothing there. Just the coat rack. Just the shadow of a chair thrown by the street lamp outside. The heart hammers a frantic rhythm against the ribs. It was nothing, the mind reasons, just a trick of the light. But then it happens again, and again. The shadows detach themselves from the objects. They begin to have weight. They begin to have intent. These are the shadow people. They are a universal hallucination, a shared archetype of the amphetamine psychosis reported by users across continents and decades. They are tall, silhouetted figures, often wearing hats or hoods, darker than the darkness around them. They do not have faces, only a blank, observing void. They stand in doorways. They crouch behind furniture. They glide along the walls like ink spilled in water. It is a haunting not by the ghosts of the dead, but by the ghosts of the living mind. The brain, starved of the ability to dream while asleep, begins to dream while awake. It projects its deepest, most primal fears onto the canvas of the room. The predator instinct, buried deep in the reptilian stem of the brain, is activated. The user feels hunted. The silence of the room ceases to be silent. It fills with phantom whispers. At first, it sounds like a radio left on in another room, a low, murmuring chatter that cannot quite be understood. Then, the voices clarify. They are discussing the user. They are plotting. They are judging. They know what you did. They are coming for you. They are outside the door. The paranoia sets in like a heavy, suffocating fog. It is not a rational fear. It is a chemical conviction. The user moves to the window, peering through the slats of the blinds. The street outside is empty. The leaves of the trees stir in the wind. But the user does not see an empty street. They see a stage set for an ambush. That car parked down the block, it has been there too long. That flicker of a lighter in the alley, it is a signal. The innocent world is reinterpreted as a vast, complex conspiracy directed solely at them. The body becomes a traitor. The skin feels tight, as if it is shrinking, as if it doesn't fit the flesh underneath. A sensation of crawling begins formication. The user scratches, convinced that there are things beneath the dermis, tiny invaders that must be removed. It is a desperate attempt to scratch away the anxiety that is crawling on the inside of the nerves. This state of profound isolation is the true tragedy of the drug. The user is locked in a solitary confinement of their own making. They could be in a crowded room, surrounded by friends or family, but they are alone in their dimension of terror. If they speak of the shadow people, they are met with confused looks or fear. So they stay silent. They watch the watchers. They engage in a silent, terrifying standoff with entities that do not exist. The drug promised power. It promised the energy of a god, the focus of a machine, the confidence of a king. But in the end, it delivers only a paranoid frailty. It strips away the armor of the psyche, leaving the soul naked and shivering in a house of mirrors. Every reflection is distorted. Every sound is a threat. Every shadow is an enemy. The shadow people are the guardians of the threshold we were never meant to cross. They are the warning signs posted at the limits of human endurance. They remind us that the mind is a fragile construct, held together by the rhythm of day and night. When we break that rhythm with the brute force of chemistry, we invite the chaos in. Imagine the user, standing in the center of the room, clutching a weapon that defends against nothing. The sun is rising outside, a pale gray dawn that offers no relief. For the shadows do not flee from the light of the sun. They live in the light of the drug. The eyes are wide, rimmed with red, staring into the corners of the ceiling. The exhaustion is a physical pain, a crushing weight that feels like gravity has doubled. But the crystal in the blood screams, "Awake. Watch. They are here." It is a specific, modern form of madness. In ancient times, people who saw visions were thought to be touched by the gods. But these visions are not divine. They are hollow. The shadow people have no message to deliver, no wisdom to impart. They are merely the emptiness of the void, given shape by a dying mind. They are the absence of sleep made visible. As we witness this scene, let us feel a deep, mournful empathy. The person in the room is not a monster. They are a victim of a chemical lie. They sought to escape the limits of time, to steal extra hours from the night, and in doing so, they lost the very thing that makes time bearable. They lost the sanctuary of the dream. Now, the dream has come for them, twisted and dark, to claim its debt. The twilight deepens, the shadows lengthen, the whispers grow louder, and the user waits, trapped in the amber of a chemically induced eternity, watching the dark figures dance in the corner of the eye, praying for a sleep that feels like it will never, ever come. We stand now at the end of the timeline, looking out over the landscape of the present day. The story that began in the misty silence of the Asian hills, that traveled through the bubbling flasks of the alchemists, that flew on the wings of warplanes and hid in the cupboards of the suburbs, has now diffused into the very atmosphere of the modern world. The sharp, singular point of discovery, that moment when the first crystal precipitated from the solution, has expanded into a vast, reverberating echo. The legacy of the Ma Huang plant, once a guardian of breath, has mutated into a global sorrow, a low-frequency hum of tragedy that vibrates beneath the surface of our cities and our silence. It is no longer just a tactic of war used by generals to move armies across a map. It is no longer just a tool for labor used to wring a few more hours of productivity from the weary worker. It has become something elemental, a scourge that hollows out communities from the inside, leaving behind shells where there were once homes. To understand the scale of this echo, we must look at the map of the world not as a collection of borders and nations, but as a network of veins and arteries, pulsing with the flow of commerce and chemistry. In the vast superlabs hidden in the jungles and the industrial parks, the cooking continues. But the romance of the outlaw biker in the canyon is gone. It has been replaced by the cold efficiency of the cartel, by the industrial scale of the vat and the reactor. The shadow is now mass-produced. It is shipped in tons, hidden in the hollows of steel machinery, dissolved in liquids, pressed into colorful pills that look like candy. It moves with the relentless logic of the market, finding the cracks in society, finding the places where hope has grown thin, and where the desire to feel something, anything other than the gray weight of reality, is strong. Picture a small town in the rural heartland, a place that history seems to have forgotten. The factories have closed, the storefronts are boarded up, and the wind blows dust down the empty main street. It is here, in the vacuum left by the retreat of industry, that the crystal finds its most fertile ground. It enters the community like a vapor. It offers a cheap, immediate transcendence. For the young man with no prospects, for the mother working 3 jobs, the drug offers a temporary illusion of power, a feeling of significance in a world that tells them they do not matter. But the price is the hollowing out. Walk through these neighborhoods in the mind's eye. The houses stand, but the spirit within them has been fractured. The copper wire has been stripped from the walls, sold for a few grams of the white powder. The family albums are gathering dust, the faces in the photographs smiling from a time before the shadow fell. The playgrounds are quiet. The drug acts as a solvent, dissolving the bonds of trust, of family, of community. It creates a diaspora of the lost, people who wander the streets of their own hometowns like ghosts, tethered to the next hit, severed from the past and the future. And yet, if we step back, if we view this tragedy through the long, dispassionate lens of history, we see something more than just crime and addiction. We see a tragic testament to the human spirit's eternal struggle with its own limitations. The history of methamphetamine is, at its core, the history of our refusal to be merely biological creatures. We are animals born of the earth, bound by the cycles of the sun and the moon. We are designed to hunt and gather, to wake and sleep, to expend energy and to recover it. But we possess a mind that dreams of the infinite. We look at the stars and want to touch them. We look at the horizon and want to cross it. We look at the night and see it not as a time for rest, but as a barrier to our ambition. We resent the need for sleep. We resent the frailty of our bodies. We resent the fact that we must stop. So we reached for the lightning. We sought a way to conquer sleep, to conquer fatigue, to decouple our will from our biology. We wanted to be gods of pure energy, tireless and bright. And in the laboratory, we found the key. We found the molecule that could trick the brain into believing it had limitless reserves. We found the spark that could ignite the nervous system and banish the darkness. But we forgot the ancient law of the alchemists, equivalent exchange. You cannot create energy out of nothing. You can only borrow it. And the interest rate of this particular loan is ruinous. We reached for the lightning, and we found that it burns. It burns the mind, scorching the delicate networks of neurons. It burns the body, consuming the muscle and the bone. It burns the soul, leaving behind a charred residue of paranoia and regret. The crystal sits now in the evidence lockers of police stations around the world. Imagine thousands of these rooms, smelling of stale coffee and old paper. On the metal shelves, in plastic bags labeled with case numbers and dates, lie the seizures, the white powder, the shards of ice. They sit there, inert and silent. They are chemical ghosts that refuse to be exorcised. They are the physical remnants of the madness, the crystallized tears of the Ma Huang plant. Each bag represents a story of a truck driver trying to make a deadline, a story of a student trying to pass an exam, a story of a soldier trying to stay brave, a story of a person trying to escape the pain of being alive. The evidence locker is a library of broken dreams, a museum of our failed attempt to cheat the gods of time. It reminds us, in its terrible silence, that there is a price for stealing time from the night. We thought we could extend the day forever. We thought we could banish the shadows. But the shadows always return, and when they do, they are longer and darker than before. For every hour of artificial energy borrowed, a debt is accrued in the body and the spirit. It is a debt that cannot be paid with money. It must be paid in silence. It must be paid in exhaustion. It must be paid in the slow, painful reconstruction of the self. The global sorrow is the collective weight of this debt. It is the grief of parents who have lost children to the shadow. It is the burden of healthcare systems overwhelmed by the failing hearts and the broken minds. It is the sadness of a world that has forgotten how to stop, how to rest, how to simply be. But the story does not have to end in darkness. History is a circle, and sometimes to find the way forward, we must look back to the beginning. Let us return, in our imagination, to the misty hills of Asia where our journey began. The Ma Huang plant is still there. It still grows on the rocky slopes, drinking the rain and the sunlight. It still sways in the wind, a humble green sentinel. It has not changed. It holds its secret within its fibers, balanced by the other compounds, buffered by the wisdom of evolution. It offers its gift of breath gently, in harmony with the rhythms of the earth. The plant knows what we have forgotten, that rest is not a weakness. It is a season. Just as the winter must come to rest the land before the spring can bloom, so too must the night come to rest the mind. The heaviness of the eyelids is not a curse, it is a blessing. It is the body's way of calling us home. It is the invitation to lay down the burden of consciousness, to let go of the striving, the wanting, the doing. The synthesized crystal took away the peace because it tried to sever us from this cycle. It tried to make us eternal summer, eternal noon. But we are creatures of the twilight as well. We need the dark. We need the silence. We need the deep, dreamless waters of sleep to wash away the dust of the world. As we close this chapter and close the book on the biography of this molecule, let us make a quiet pact with ourselves. Let us reject the false promise of the crystal. Let us reject the demand for constant productivity, for tireless action, for a life lived at the speed of a chemical reaction. Let us accept our humanity, with all its beautiful limitations. Feel the weight of the history we have traversed. Feel the exhaustion of the soldiers, the workers, the pilots, and the wanderers. They are all resting now. The noise of the century has faded. The roar of the engines is gone. The whispers of the shadow people have been silenced. There is only the calm, steady rhythm of your own breathing, in and out. The sacred breath. The breath that connects you to the plant on the hill, to the air of the world, to the quiet pulse of the universe. The evidence lockers are closed. The laboratories are dark. The alchemist has put down his flask. The experiment is over. Let us retreat now into the safety of natural sleep. Let the darkness wrap around you like a soft, heavy blanket. There is nothing more you need to do. There is nothing more you need to be. The horizon can wait. The world can wait. The debt has been paid. Be grateful for the heaviness of your eyelids. Feel them drooping, closing, shutting out the light. For in the end, rest is not a weakness to be cured. It is the sacred foundation of our very humanity. It is the place where we are made whole again. Sleep now. The history is written. The night is yours. Sleep.